Welcome, everyone. I am Jeff Lewis.
And I'm Tim Kowal. Both Jeff and I are certified appellate specialists, and as uncertified podcast co-hosts, we try to bring our audience of trial and appellate attorneys some news and perspectives they can use in their practice. As always, if you find this podcast of use and helpful to your practice, please do recommend it to a colleague.
And a quick announcement, our podcast is sponsored by CaseText. CaseText is a legal research tool that harnesses AI in a lightning-fast interface to help lawyers find case authority fast. CaseText has also announced a new AI tool called Co-Counsel, which we highly endorse. Listeners of the podcast will receive a 25% lifetime discount on CaseText's legal research tool, available to them if they sign up at casetext.com/calp. That's casetext.com/CALP.
And speaking of AI, that's the topic on everyone's lips is what is AI going to do to the legal industry? Is it going to replace all us lawyers? And to talk more about that topic, today we welcome to the podcast Adam Unikowsky. Adam is a former law clerk to Justice Scalia. He's a prominent Supreme Court and constitutional litigator. He has had 9 Supreme Court arguments under his belt. Adam's appellate and Supreme Court experience spans a wide range of industries and subject matters, including securities litigation, Indian law, patents, civil procedure, and constitutional law. With his depth of insight into the appellate and Supreme Court litigation process, Adam frequently collaborates with larger legal teams in developing strategies across multiple cases and courts. In addition to his Supreme Court clerkship, Adam also was a clerk for Judge Ginsburg on the D.C. Circuit. And specifically bearing on our conversation today about AI in the legal field, Adam holds undergraduate and graduate degrees in electrical engineering and computer science. Adam Unikowsky, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to participating.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. We did see you had posted a tweet on Twitter some months ago about your Substack blog post. I think the title, we'll talk about a little bit later on the podcast. The title is, I think it's Should AI Replace Law Clerks? But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit more about you and your practice. Would you tell us a little bit more about your practice, Adam, and do not leave out your Supreme Court appearances?
Sure. I'm a partner at Jenner & Block in the Appellate Supreme Court practice in Washington, D.C. But really, I handle both Appellate Supreme Court litigation as well as trial litigation agencies. I'm pretty much interested in anything. So any type of litigation with a legal angle, I'd love to do it. For instance, this year I've argued appeals in an arbitration case and in a securities enforcement action case. I've argued cases in everything from federal Indian law to constitutional law to criminal procedure to lots of other things. So, I have interests across a wide range of legal issues, and I love arguing in the courts of appeals and the Supreme Court. That's what I love to do. There's nothing else that gets me more excited, but of course I love doing cases in federal district court too, where you really have to be creative and there's no record that you have to they have to use. You can make your own new arguments and not be accused of making a new argument. So that's pretty great too. And as you said, yes, I've argued several times in front of the Supreme Court, which is of course a real rush for any lawyer. I'm doing another one in October, or at least in the fall, probably October, in an interesting case about Article 3 standing. So I'm really stoked about that.
Oh, that's fascinating. We'll have to watch for that. If you would send us a link to that case so we can put it in the show notes and follow it. Speaking of clerkships. And I asked you this a few moments ago, just before we hit record, about the value of clerkships. Now, you've clerked on both the Supreme Court and an intermediate court of appeals in the D.C. Circuit. It seems like part of the value of a clerkship is that you get an experience and a sense of how the court operates. And if that holds true, I wondered if you think a clerkship holds additional value or heightened value if you're doing it at a different level where your practice takes you most, at the district level or at the intermediate level or at the U.S. or at a Supreme Court level. I wonder if you can comment on that.
Yeah, I do think it helps. Having a sense of how the judges decide cases gives you a sense of what you should put in your briefs to try to get them to decide the case in favor of you. I mean, it's probably the case that if you're, if you're litigating regularly in the courts of appeals for purely instrumental purposes, the appellate clerkship will offer you more information about the process behind the scenes. But of course, clerking for the Supreme Court is a really neat thing to do. I mean, you're working on very significant cases. You're seeing how things work from behind the scenes, and it's a great year.
Can you point to any things, any experiences, or behind the curtain conversations, glimpses that you got at the intermediate level that maybe you wouldn't have gotten through your experience at the U.S. Supreme Court?
Well, I think one of the differences is that the Court of Appeals has mandatory jurisdiction over appeals. It can't just take the cases that seem to be good vehicles to resolve legal issues. They have to decide every case that reaches them. And so, a lot of cases tend to be very complicated factually, with lots of twists and turns, and sort of seeing how the judges deal with that and kind of pick out the important issues. I think it's helpful for an appellate lawyer. Like, you really have to turn your brief into like a story, and crystallize the case into a couple of issues, or else the judge's eyes kind of glaze over. I think that just like understanding, especially since the judges hear a lot of appeals, like actually the DC Circuit where I clerk hears less than, for instance, the Ninth Circuit, or the California Court of Appeals, where the judges are probably hearing 5, 10 more cases per sitting. And there's only so much information they can retain about a given case. And so like recognizing that you will know a lot more about your case than the judges, and you've got to crystallize the case into an easily comprehensible story, is like one of the things that you learn that's particular to clerking in an appellate court, I think.
Yeah. Now, Adam, you're an appellate attorney. Can you tell us, a day in the life of your practice as an appellate attorney? Are you always in the Court of Appeal? Are you sometimes in the district courts or trial courts helping to make the record? What's a typical day or a week look like for you?
I'd say it's actually probably less often in the courts of appeals than in other tribunals. I do a lot of cases in federal district court, where, as you say, I think in some ways there's more creativity as a lawyer necessary, because you're not sticking with the record, you're making the record, you're figuring out your legal theories. And oftentimes I'm asked to come in before a lawsuit's even been filed. A client will call and say, there's this looming issue, and should we sue? Should we do something before we sue? Could we sue? And, the public never learns about this representation, but that actually often involves some of the most creativity of all, because you have to figure out the legal issues, and then you can also figure out what you can do to avoid them. And so there's several degrees of freedom there. So it depends on the day, really, exactly what I'll do.
Right. I wonder if you could tell us, do you have any preference being the appellant or the appellee?
Well, I like to be the appellee, because then you won. Then you can just say there is no abuse of discretion, nothing to see here. But getting a decision from a district court flipped is very exciting, right? Like, clients love it because they feel vindicated, and it's obviously harder to get a decision reversed than not. Most cases are affirmed. So, I guess you're more likely to win if you're the appellee, but there's nothing quite like getting a decision flipped. Like, you feel like you've done your job. So that.
What are some of the things that you bring to the table as an appellate attorney that most commonly kind of make the trial attorney's eyes light up in recognition? Yeah, this is why we wanted to bring an appellate perspective into the room. Do you see any things that commonly come up, things that are commonly missed, perspectives that maybe are commonly not seen until you bring an appellate attorney into the picture?
I just think it sometimes helps to have a fresh eye on some of the issues. I mean, it's easy for a trial lawyer who's been locked into a case for several years to, get upset about maybe certain factual rulings or some procedural rulings that may actually have been totally unfair in context, but which the appellate court, isn't really going to care about. At the end of the day, they'll say no abuse of discretion, and so I think what the appellate lawyer does is try to pick apart the issues of law that are reviewed de novo that may not seem particularly salient to a trial lawyer who's battling over the facts and engaging in motions practice over discovery, but is the kind of issue of an appellate court might be interested in.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to start mooting the case from day one, asking the questions that you think a panel is going to ask. What about bringing or developing a theme of the case? Do you find that when you come onto a case, the trial team already has a theme that you figure can carry forward onto the appeal, or do you feel that you often have to redevelop or redesign a theme of the case for the appellate arguments?
Yeah, I mean, the trial teams usually have a theme because, they're always planning to bring the case to a jury. I mean, for our firm, as with many firms, like, when you start the case, you're assuming you're going to try the case. And if the case goes away, it goes away. But from day one, that's how you're laser focused. And of course, you have a jury that hears the case. They're going to fall asleep unless you have a pretty clear theme. Unfortunately, sometimes the theme for the appeal may not be the same. Like the justice and fairness of a situation may be relevant to factual findings. And then on appeal, it's actually really the interpretation of the contract. So, you've got to just make sure to preserve your issues and know what you're going to raise to the jury and know what you're preserving in the record.
Yeah. Are there, let's talk briefly about, do you have any favorite briefing tips, any patented Adam Unikowsky tricks that you like to use commonly in your briefs?
I always like writing an intro. I mean, a punchy intro that sets forth my case. I like to do that, first. I always try to be under the word limit by a lot if I can. I really don't, because I find when I'm reading briefs, when I'm mooting cases, like my eyes start to glaze over at around like page 37. So my philosophy is like as short as possible. And if you have to go to the word limit, fine. That's something that's important to me. And the other thing is unclear writing usually implies unclear thinking. Like when you're reading something and it's not well written, oftentimes it's because you don't really understand your argument and you're just like putting it there and trying, so like for me, that's the most important thing. Like if something is unclear, it's probably because I haven't really figured it out. And when I'm proofreading a brief or when I'm reading over, that's what I tell myself anyway.
I'm writing that down. If something is unclear, it's probably because I haven't figured it out. I think that really rings true for me. I like to sometimes come back to my appellate briefs that I filed. I mean, in an ideal world, I'll have put it in the drawer for a couple of weeks before I file it and make sure it still makes sense. But sometimes it doesn't happen until a couple of months after I filed it, and I bring it out to see if it still makes sense. And every now and then you find something, I don't know if that argument quite makes sense, and if it doesn't make sense to me now, it probably wasn't exactly clear in my mind then, and it probably has a very, very low percentage chance of persuading anybody if it's unclear.
And the other thing is also collaboration is very important. Like I always assume I've missed something, even if I'm certain I didn't miss an argument, I'm assume I've done it, I've missed it, and I always like to collaborate with another person, associate or another partner. And for the associates listening out there, don't just say this is great, you found a typo. Like the purpose of the review is to tell me what I've missed. So for me, collaboration is really essential to getting a good product.
And so we covered Adam's briefing tips. What about oral argument? You've got 9 Supreme Court appearances under your belt. Do you have what goes into making an effective oral argument? And do you still get butterflies making oral argument appearances other than in the Supreme Court? Now you've been up against the big 9. Is it now all clear sailing when you're in an intermediate court of appeals?
It's definitely not clear sailing in any court. Any judge can end your career if you did something bad. So no, even if I'm in state court or if I'm in an agency, I had an argument in the Patent Trial and Appeal Board, Patent and Trademark Appeal Board, excuse me, a few weeks ago or a few months ago, where I was like extreme butterflies. It was a Zoom argument, and like in front of a judge deciding a case. So it's so nerve-wracking. The tips for me are just like answer the questions directly and like don't try to get back to what you're going to say because they don't care. You've already read it. And so like you get a question, just don't filibuster, answer it directly. And if you never in your 10 minutes get back to like the prepared remarks, they don't care about them anyway.
I think that's a hard lesson for a lot of attorneys to get to. They've got their outline and everything on there is gold. They have to cover them all.
So when I come to the podium in a case, I never bring any written materials, no outline, because I worry I'll use it as a crutch. I have my briefs there in case they're like, well, on page 46 of your brief, you said this. But other than the briefs that are on the next to me, I don't bring a paper, and it's by design because I don't want to start reading. So
even when you're in front of the United States Supreme Court, you walk up to the podium without prepared remarks?
Yeah, no notes.
Wow.
Well, it sounds better. There's a funny argument from several years ago where an attorney was clearly reading for like about a minute, and then Justice Scalia, it's on Oye, but I forget what it's called, stops him and he says, "Counsel, are you reading this?" And there's this like painful 20-second pause, and then Justice Breyer's like, "It's all right, just go on." So yeah, that was one of the most painful oral argument moments I've ever heard, and I've striven to avoid.
It
I've
stuck
strived to
with you.
avoid that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, so
Okay.
the judges and justices hate read oral arguments that much, huh? That they'll stop an advocate in mid sentence.
You don't want to do that. Yeah, and you're there to answer their questions. And like if they see that you're stumbling or stuttering, maybe they'll start asking you questions. So maybe it's an incentive for them to do that.
Yeah.
Hey, can I ask, what do you think of the new format in the post-COVID era of the justices when they are asking questions down the line in more orderly fashion as opposed to the old way of here, there, and everywhere? What do you think of that new question asking format?
So it's now kind of like a hybrid. So during COVID, when they're on the phone, it would just be down the line. Now they're back in the courtroom and they do the free for all, but then there's questions at the end. So like the way it works now is like they wait for Justice Thomas to ask a question if he has one, maybe a couple, and then there's the usual free for all, and then at the end they go through all the justices and ask their questions. I think it's great.
I see.
Because it used to be quite dissatisfying. Like your 30 minutes expired, and like that's it. There's more questions, and like, if it goes on a little longer, so all the justices have a chance to ask whatever questions they have, I think it's all the better. I mean, a few extra minutes, I hope it improves the quality of the decision making. Maybe it does, and so I think that's great.
Now, Adam, as I read from your bio up at the top, you have undergraduate and graduate degrees in electrical engineering and computer science. Would you tell us a little bit more about that? At the time you were studying electrical engineering and computer science, did you have designs on going into law with that under your belt, or was the path to law a turn that would come later on?
It was later. So, I started as a physics major, which I ended up actually being a double major also. I really enjoyed that. And then I thought, maybe I should try something more practical. So I did electrical engineering and computer science, which is really just like computer engineering and computer science, which I enjoyed as well. And then I ended up getting a master's degree. And I don't exactly know how I somehow got diverted to law school. I mean, I like to argue like everyone else. And I was on my college's debate team, believe it or not. And so I just kind of thought it would be an interesting career. And it was almost like, I remember just like one day on a lark, I was just like, yeah, I'll go to law school. But it wasn't, I didn't start out that way. Somewhere around senior year, I was just like, well, let's give this a shot. Yeah. And that's it.
Okay. So on a lark, I'll decide to go to law school, and on a lark, I'll get Supreme Court clerkship, and on a lark, I'll make 9 oral argument appearances in the U.S. Supreme Court.
Well, but it's, I mean, physics and also the computer engineering is like, it's great. It's absolutely fascinating. So I learned a lot, and, I'll never regret that.
Now that must play a role in your current quest to replace all human law clerks with artificial intelligence. Is that
well, I mean, I don't,
how does your background play in there?
I mean, some of the computer people I met in college were amazingly brilliant. I have incredible admiration for many of the people I encountered at the time. And now one can see the type of unbelievable technology that maybe not them specifically, but amazing computer engineers have produced. I mean, got to say, I don't know if you all use ChatGPT and things like that, and and DALL-E, Stable Diffusion, and all these technologies, but like, it's mind blowing. I was absolutely flabbergasted when I saw their capabilities.
Yeah. Okay, so Adam Unikowsky's article on his Substack blog, which we'll cite in the show notes, is "Should AI Replace Law Clerks?" And so here's the pitch from the blog post, and then this is after Adam offers some disclaimers about how AI probably should not replace judges. He goes on to say, here's the precis of the piece. However, in the shorter term, AI could, and in my view should, serve the same role that law clerks play now. The AI would review the briefs, summarize the arguments, and make a recommendation as to how the case should come out. After the judge decides how the case should be resolved, the judge could summarize the rationale to the AI, and the AI could prepare a draft of the judicial opinion based on that rationale. The judge would review and edit. The AI would cite check and offer further comments, and the opinion would then be released, end quote. So can you expand on that a little bit? That makes it sound fairly practicable and not terrifying. If it's used as a tool to supplement what the judge is doing all along, which in a way is what the law clerks are doing now.
Yeah, I mean, the goal of the judicial process is to produce accurate, well-written opinions swiftly. right? I mean, judges are public servants, and we want to have, and their goal is to resolve disputes. I mean, it's great that law students have good career opportunities. I enjoy being a law clerk, but ultimately, as a practical matter, judges are there to resolve cases accurately, fairly, in an unbiased way, and quickly. And the question is, can AI help them do that? And I think it can. I mean, if we assume we'll soon get to a place where an AI's memo is going to be as good or better than a recent law student's memo, and also the AI can complete this process in like 10 seconds, I mean, I think it can do it. And if it can do it, it should do it.
Now, do you think, let's talk about today. Do you think the AI is good enough right now as we are having this conversation to completely replace human law clerks? Or do you think that at least one law clerk is still going to be there to check the work of the AI? Where do you think we are as of this moment in April of 2023?
So like, I kind of feel like it keeps changing like every week. Like, when I wrote this post, still at GPT-3, now we're GPT-4, which does all kinds of interesting things. And, there's competition. So like, I haven't even checked the most recent AI. Like the AIs from like a month ago that I worked with are not quite ready for prime time yet. But I wouldn't be surprised. And I haven't even tried some of the newer stuff. And then I have, within a year, 2 years, I wouldn't be surprised if like someone not knowing who wrote it compared a law clerk memo to an AI memo would say the AI memo is better. It's more thorough, didn't miss anything, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. How do we, well, I'll just share, I mean, because we are fairly early on in this AI endeavor, I'll just share an anecdote because maybe that's about all we have at these early stages. I've run some, I've run some chat GPT driven memos actually through CoCounsel, the case text product, and they have been great at helping me get up to speed for a new client call. For example, they send me a brief or an opinion, a judicial decision that they'd like to review, and I can run it through and they can summarize it. Or I want to know about a particular legal issue, so I have it give me a quick and dirty summary of California case law on a particular issue, and it gets me up to speed, in 5 minutes, where otherwise it might have taken me half hour or an hour with the assistance of a junior associate. But there are limitations that I've spotted. I had a conversation this morning where I made use of a couple of quick memos that I ran, just 5 minutes before the phone call. But then there was one case that the potential client told me, now here's the definitive case in this area, and I go back to these memos that I ran, and it hadn't talked about that case. I don't know how it missed it, but there are now, of course, there are going to be oversights and incorrect things in a human law clerk or junior associate's memo as well. But yeah, I guess maybe the point is that AI is not a panacea where it's going to have advantages in that it's going to be faster, certainly faster, more accurate in some ways, but maybe less accurate in other ways. And how do we ferret that out so we know how to compensate for its deficiencies?
Well, that depends on what its deficiencies are, and they're going to slowly decrease. So like, I mean, if the AI will miss things, but if it misses fewer things than a human, then I think you want to use the better rather than the worse. Yeah. Right. I mean, you think it's perfect, but you want to, certainly human law clerks. I mean, reflecting on that period of my career, I was in my 20s, I was pretty dumb. I mean, I don't really trust the former version of myself to provide advice, to be honest. Not only that, but the AIs have read every single case. I mean, at least once they're trained on the full database. I don't know if that's happened yet, but eventually they'll be trained on LFS law, and they'll have read every single case and memorized them. That's certainly a useful feature, and and it's cheap, and it's also unbiased, right? I mean, the AI against humans may have unconscious or implicit biases based on the characteristic of a litigant or a lawyer, and then the AI won't have that because it's a computer, and I think that's another advantage.
Adam, I've got a couple questions. And part of my ignorance, I never clerked anywhere. So I have maybe a romanticized view of the process. Maybe it's a little less transactional than what you laid out in your article. Is there something to a judge and a law clerk interacting, and a judge maybe stepping down from the ivory tower and learning from a clerk, and vice versa, that would be lost if AI replaced a law clerk?
Yeah, well, to some extent, yeah. Like I had a great time clerking for both the judges. I got along with them well. We had a lot of very interesting, conversations, and I don't know what they got out of it, but I got a lot out of it, that's for sure. But I'm a pretty practical person, and the judge's job is to decide cases according to law, especially in lower courts. It's just mastering the facts in the record and the relevant legal principles. The other thing is you can still have the law clerks. I mean, they're not that expensive. Law clerks don't make a huge amount of money. It's just the types of things they'll do might be different. Maybe you'll have fewer of them and review them. I mean, like you can still have law clerks if the judge wants to hang out with a younger person. That's fine. But, a lot of being a law clerk is, is sitting in your office and like figuring out some issue you've never seen before, right? I mean, you graduate from law school, you don't know anything. And, and then make mistakes. That's a pretty typical law clerk day. I'm not sure we should romanticize that either, I guess.
Are you familiar with the technique, I guess you would call it, of prompting the AI, prompting Chat GPT? I'm not an expert in this. I've not tried it myself, but I guess the idea would be you can give a search prompt to Chat GPT, say, tell me if the international shoe standard is met in this case, such that minimum contacts are established when the defendant was served at an airport, when traveling in the state, something like that. But then you could give it further prompts that, and this was just for a passing through a layover flight, and also, by the way, he has no other contacts. I guess you just keep feeding it more information and more prompts, scale it into the right jurisdiction. Oh, this is a state court that's going to be deciding it rather than a federal court, or what state it is. Keep giving it more and more specificity in the prompt, and it will massage and give you different or better results. And I wonder if that is going to wind up playing a big role in how to give proper prompts to Chat GPT, whatever the AI interface technology is, and do attorneys, law students, law clerks need to be trained better in how to get the best results out of AI?
So you're right. The AI can remember your prior answer and modify its answers based on new information. And in fact, there's all these websites explaining interesting ways to get ChatGPT to do what you want. Like, answer this, assuming I'm an educated person in the voice of a college professor or something. It'll do it actually, or in the voice of an economist or something. If you like that mode of thinking. So yes, I think that as the technology improves, we will have to learn to use it in a way to harness its capabilities.
Adam, I'm still stuck. I'm sorry. I'm still stuck on stepping up to the podium without notes. And I'm wondering, preparation must be super important for you. Has AI changed the way in which you prepare for oral argument?
No, I haven't really used AI in my practice. It's more just been like, whoa, this is neat. Like, pretty soon it's going to get there. I wouldn't say that I use it every day. I find that if you're trying to read something during an argument, then you're losing, or you're winning and they're not listening anyway, in which case you just stop because you're going to, So I feel like reading of course, you have the briefs there because they'll just ask you something about the briefs and you need to say, oh, at page 38, let me look at the footnote. But, reading, that's the answer to your question.
Yeah, I got to tell you, the courts we practice in, mostly California state courts, 90% of the time, the opinion's already written in full. And much of oral argument, I think, is the chance to play up policy or the why and the passion arguments. So I don't see much value in reading. But I got to tell you, I always have little cards with notes, like little segmented notes in case the hard question comes up that I don't really want to advance, but in case I have to answer it. Interesting. Have you played around with ChatGPT to do a mock oral argument? I've done that. It's really fascinating.
I haven't, but it's a good idea.
Yeah. On along those lines, I've been meaning to check up to see if I remember years ago, Josh Blackman was involved with a project to kind gosh, I'm going off a years old memory now, but I think his project was to try to feed into to an AI system all of the past opinions of various Supreme Court justices to kind of build an ideological profile, so to speak, so that the AI could prognosticate on how a particular justice would come out in a particular case with particular facts and law at issue. And gosh, again, this was years ago that I remember he was explaining this project, and I haven't kept up with it. But I wonder, I mean, that project must be supercharged by this point. And I wonder if you're going to the United States Supreme Court, or for that matter, any intermediate Court of Appeals, it seems like AI is probably not too far off, if we're not there already, where the AI could probably prognosticate how this particular constituent panel would come out on if there is a on a certain issue, even if it is an ideologically charged issue.
I think that's true. I mean, that sounds like a particularly high degree of difficulty, but it's certainly, I mean, you can imagine in some cases. So consider something where, certain judges have certain views, like qualified immunity or something. All right. I can certainly see a world in which the AI is capable of like comparing the facts of one case to the relevant legal standard, figuring out the level of generality of the legal standard, and then looking at the judge's qualified immunity cases and saying, okay, if this is a qualified immunity hawk, it's really got to be identical to the facts of the prior cases. And if it's more of a dove, well, then, it's sort of in the same ballpark, close enough. And so, yeah, you can imagine that. I mean, like, I think it's many years off to really, read all of a judge's judicial opinions and then read a brief like that. That strikes me as hard. But look, my philosophy with this stuff is if a human can do it, then there's nothing special about the human brain that can't be replicated if you have a bunch of circuits rather than neurons. And so me, you, are capable of reading a brief and saying, hey, I've read this judge's decisions. This is what I think the judge is going to do. And if we can do it, then I don't see any reason why a computer can't do it, as the technology improves.
Well, that's going to be the trick, is that'll be the space to watch, to see if there is something that AI consistently, for whatever reason, doesn't seem to be able to do a certain thing that we humans can do. That'll be the space to watch, to see what is it that makes us humans special, if anything. I think that may be a neat opportunity that AI gives us, is that we're not just here, just piecing together legal arguments. AI now, we've got the AI breath hot on our neck, that they're doing what we're doing on our mediocre days. We have to make every day, we have to push that envelope so we could do that thing that AI can't do.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of lawyering, not all, but a lot of lawyering is a little bit mundane. I mean, it's applying the facts of the law. Certainly a lot of judging, an unpublished opinion is applying the facts of the law. Like, I will agree that an AI may not be able to come up with incredible scientific advancements, prove amazing math theorems or whatever, but like how much of judging, or what law clerks do, or how much of what we do every day, is really quite at that level of intellect. So, I don't think lawyers will be replaced, but many tasks we do, I think, can probably be automated. That's what I think.
Yeah. And you mentioned something about, well, when you were saying that maybe anything that we human lawyers can do, an AI can do. And I thought, well, what about when you're asking a specific research question? Like I was asking a research question about to co-counsel the other day about terminating sanctions, and can you get writ relief on that? And the result I got out of it was interesting, because some of the results, they don't come back direct. I mean, they come back with ones that are directly on point. Here was an issue of terminating sanctions, and here's how the court came down on it. But there was another one involving here was attempt to disqualify an expert, and even though it's the results said, even though it's not right on point to the research request, it is analogous to because it effectively ended the case when this expert was excluded or something. And I thought, wow, that's pretty creative. That I would not have gotten that on a Boolean search result through a traditional a legal research tool.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, the way these AIs work is they're not really creative. I mean, they're basically taking a huge database and figuring out, using some probabilistic model, what the most likely next word is based on a bunch of input words, based on a huge training data set. But, when we're lawyers, in many cases, not all, that's what we're doing. We're looking at a set of facts and looking at how prior courts have evaluated similar facts. And in fact, when you're writing a brief, you kind of don't want to have to be creative, right? It's much easier if you say there's a case that's directly on point and it forecloses plaintiffs' or defendants' claims. In fact, the most effective briefs are like, in fact, I wrote in the blog entry that when a court calls your arguments creative, it almost always means they've just rejected your argument.
Right.
And so for many of the legal tasks, I don't know what percentage, but many of them, it seems to me that these models of just, looking at prior decisions and doctrines and materials and just figuring out what the next word should be based on prior cases is kind of what it should do if it wants to be.
Yeah, that's an interesting point about trying to be as uncreative as possible. You only want to be creative where you don't have any good arguments.
That's right.
Point. Like the engineering maxim, you want to fulfill your project with as few innovations as possible.
Exactly. It's so much easier when you have a case that forecloses the other side. It's one paragraph, you move on to the next section, right? No policy arguments, no extrapolations, nothing. You win. And so that's the best brief.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So was your point there that will AI be able to make those creative arguments, the policy arguments, the social ramifications of a judicial holding going a certain way?
I mean, AI is actually pretty good already at making policy arguments. You ask it like, give me 5 reasons why this is better than that, and it'll kind of do it actually fairly well because of its mastery of lots of policy arguments out there. But I think AI may. Like your nightmare when you're a brief writer is like screwing up and like not finding the right case, right? Like sometimes there's just an answer that you haven't figured out. And that's something the AI will help you with. And the other thing is when you're writing a brief, I mean, you want it to be a little bit punchy, but I mean, it's got to be a little boring too. Like it can't be like, because you don't know who your panel is going to be. It's written, in the sort of calm, methodical style, rather than tons of pizzazz. Like you got to limit the pizzazz, and that's the kind of writing style that the AI is good at. So like maybe the AI won't be a spectacular novelist, but nor are most lawyers, nor should they be, at least in their briefs.
Right. Okay, Adam, let me go back to your article. The article is "Should AI Replace Law Clerks?" And in your article, you anticipate the objection. So you're telling me there aren't any harms to letting AI tell judges what to do? And Adam's answer is yes, that is basically what I am telling you. Could you elaborate on that?
Well, the word basically is doing a lot of work there. I think that one important thing is that I'm not saying that the AI is going to replace the judge. It's an assistant, and the judge still has to exercise his or her independent judgment. And so the benefit of the AI is that it's harnessing the human abilities with the computer's ability. Like AI does some things better than people, right? AI knows more stuff, right, than you do and I do, and anyone does, because AI has read every single case. AI may lack judgment, but number one, the judge is there to exercise judgment. That's why it's called the judge. And number two, I'm not 100% persuaded law clerks have particularly good judgment either. Reflecting on my own experience.
Yeah, that's one of the things that comes through in the rest of the analysis in your post. Some of the reasons that you give for embracing AI amount to something on the order of, well, there are, we have some drawbacks to our current system, our current way of doing things. So for instance, you mentioned that judges already don't read all of the cases. They do rely to some extent on summaries provided by their clerks. And so, if they're relying instead on summaries provided by AI, then, are judges really losing anything? Maybe they're gaining something.
It depends on the judge. Like Justice Scalia would actually read every single case, cited in any opinion that he would write. He was like obsessed with not citing a case incorrectly. He would really do that. But it's easier to do that when you're in the Supreme Court hearing 60 cases a year than when you're on the Court of Appeals hearing thousands, and certainly in trial courts it is too. And so, as you say, if the judge is going to rely on a summary, there are advantages to relying on an AI to complement the judge's abilities, not to replace it.
I think you also mentioned or anticipate the objection that, well, AI is a black box and we don't know what we're getting. And your response to that is, well, law clerks are already invisible. We don't have any influence on the decisions or the biases, the inputs that are provided by the current human law clerks.
Well, so there's that. Like you go to an oral argument that you're doing, and then you see these, 27-year-olds in formal clothes, and you're like, okay, they're in with blank stares. It's not clear why I feel that much more connected to them. Plus, you don't really understand the human brain either. I mean, I don't really understand how the AI works. I've read these discussions of, transformers and whatever. I still don't fully understand exactly what it's doing. But the creative process is also quite mysterious.
Yeah.
I think just the output that matters. If the AI produces a consistently great set of memos, fine.
Yeah. And it's funny that you say that you don't understand how it works. It makes me feel a little bit better because I also don't understand how it works. And I don't have any advanced degrees in electrical engineering or computer programming. But for that matter, you're also in good company because the co-founder of Case Text says he doesn't completely understand how it works either. To some extent, they program some of these synapses, for the lack of a better term, these algorithms, and then they're kind of off to the races. It's almost like self-learning in a way. He has to put a lot of things in air quotes, when it says that AI is reading or understanding language. He has to put air quotes around reading or understanding because it's not quite reading or understanding in the same way that humans do it. But whatever way it's doing it, it's producing useful results that do effectively mimic human work product.
So I read these articles about the transformers and all that stuff, and you read it and you're like, okay, but like, does it really work? And I guess we don't really have an intuition about what happens when you train something like billions of times on like billions of gigabytes or more, terabytes and terabytes worth of data over a long time. At some point, it's like, just here's a silly example, like how like one language changes to another. Like, how is it the case that like, in 1,000 years, Latin split into French and Romanian, Spanish, Italian, and even more than that, like whatever the original human language was split into many different languages. Like, how could that have happened? And yet we know it did factually. And part of it is that our brains can't process how like, the magnitude of time and incremental changes can all add up together. It's not really related, but it's just hard to process just sufficient amount of time and the magnitude of computer operations that the AI does eventually can, I guess, produce these amazing results.
Yeah. No, that's I like that analogy. There are a lot of things, a lot of social phenomena that we don't have either the right language or our brains are just not made well enough to, like, for example, I'm thinking how for some people, the explanation to every social phenomenon they don't like is some form of conspiracy theory. Well, some things may look like a conspiracy theory, and there may be something strange that we can't explain going on, but sometimes we lack any better way of explaining it other than conspiracy theory. And maybe it's true here where we lack any better way of explaining what AI is doing other than it's reading and understanding and analyzing cases for us. But yeah, whatever is through transformers or code, it's successfully mimicking what
I took an AI course back when I was in college. We're talking like 2001 or something, and they taught us about neural nets. And like, I remember thinking it was lame. It was just like, okay, fitting something to a curve, and the whole neural thing seemed like a gimmick. And like, okay, so you train it on a bunch of things, and like you fit a curve to something, and maybe like it'll get a little better at chess or something. But I guess you do, I mean, I didn't expect this. I have to say I was surprised at what I'm seeing. In principle, look, the human brain can do it. So there's some kind of computation happening here, and there's no principal reason why, a silicon set of neurons can't replicate that, although it works very differently. But I wouldn't have believed it until I saw it.
You mentioned that you've read you've read a lot of dystopian science fiction in your time. Do you have any trepidations about the future of AI? Are there any dark turns potentially in our future?
I read a lot of AI concern, and there's a whole community of people out there who think AI is very dangerous and are really worried about alignment. And I read all that stuff because it's very interesting. I don't feel like I have a good intuition. Like I had no intuition that AI could even accomplish this before it came out. So I'm not sure I have a very good intuition of like what's going to happen. I think there's a benefit to having multiple AIs, made by different people to ensure that, the biases of a single developer don't that may be subtle, don't propagate. AI alignment is such an abstract topic. I don't even know what I don't know about this. So I just try to read about it every week and try to make sure I know what I don't know and then try to know it.
Yeah. Well, does that fact give cause for some trepidation that we don't know what we don't know? Should we be careful in how much we rely on it, and maybe if we rely on it, we should do so only in small increments?
That may be true in some cases. I mean, with respect to law clerks, the judge, a disciplined judge should rely only to a limited extent, only to the extent that it's persuasive. That's how a judge should treat a law clerk's memo. If you're persuaded by it, fine, but you have to kick the tires. You can't assume that it's correct. You should look at the cases. And so if there's like that, the level of review that we assume should happen, and I think probably does typically happen, I don't know about every single judge in the country, then I think it's fine to use the AI as an input to a human process if it's being checked, which it should be. I have another post about AIs being arbitrators, which I actually think may be a good idea in some ways too. But of course, I wouldn't want an AI Supreme Court. That would be weird.
And could AI, to the extent that it's processing and relying on decisions that are out there, some of which may have an ideological tinge, could AI thereby produce ideological results? Is there a garbage in, garbage out problem?
So there's a lot of talk that ChatGPT is too left wing and things like that, and then you see on the internet like, oh, it'll praise Biden but it won't praise Trump and things like that. So yes, you don't want an AI pushing you in a particular direction. Lord knows that lots of law clerks are ideological too, right? AI is not alone in that regard. Number one, though, in an ideological case, I'm sure the judge will be making his or her own decision. Like, I think the fact that the AI says, some ideologically charged thing won't necessarily persuade the judge. The AI is most useful outside of that context of cases. And also the AI can be programmed to produce both sides of an ideological issue as well. So, I don't anticipate dogmatic AIs on particular social issues like moving judges any more than dogmatic law clerks.
Okay. All right. Well, and last question. How do you have any predictions for what we're going to see next? How do you see these things playing out? Do you predict that there are any judges who are going to follow your advice and start replacing their human law clerks with AI, or do you think they need to start seeing some more proof of concept before they do that? And what are the steps that you see playing out before your proposal might be adopted by some appellate judges?
Well, yeah, there's going to have to be a lot of proof of concept. I mean, I think it'll start as like the judge will have the 4 law clerks, and the judge may ask the law clerk to use the AI, or the judge may use the AI himself or herself. Like, it'll be the judge and the law clerks and the AI just to see the stuff it'll do. And also originally it might be for like little stuff, find a case that says this, or, here's one sentence of the, can I get fees for this? When do I have to apply? What's the deadline to apply for fees? What's the standard for fees? What happens if I apply late? Is there tolling? Whatever. Things like that. And then say, like, write a little paragraph rejecting the argument for fees on the ground that it's untimely, if it is. Little stuff. And then if people are like, wow, this is doing it, and they check the case and it seems right.
Yeah.
And then it'll inch forward.
Yeah. I think it's it's a brave new world. I think maybe we'll even start seeing AI listening to our conversations and providing us live fact checks and additional tidbits that we could put into our conversations. What do you think, Jeff? Maybe we'll ask Pablo if we can get that when it comes available and enhance our content.
Right.
I mean, if you have Alexa's always listening. I mean, it seems creepy to have an AI always listening, but it is in your house. I mean, you say, "Hey, Alexa," it listens, right? And so everything you say, if you have Alexa installed that's listening,
Yeah.
I have some problems with that too, but if you're worried about that, then a lot of other things have to change.
Yeah. I was told by an Amazon engineer that it's not listening. I don't know how it works, whether it's listening only for the word Alexa or Hey Alexa, whatever that code word is. But how would you, how do you trust it? I guess you'd have to ask it.
You'd have to ask
Tim is so trusting.
All right. Well, Adam Unikowsky, thank you so much for joining us and talking about your article, Should AI Replace Law Clerks? We'll have a link to that in the show notes. We'll be following your work on Substack, and I hope you'll come back to the podcast again in the future.
I'd love to. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Yeah, and that wraps up our episode. We want to thank Casetext again for sponsoring our podcast. And each week we include links to the cases we discuss using Casetext, and listeners of the podcast can find a 25% discount available to them if they sign up at casetext.com/CALP. That's casetext.com/CALP.
And if you have suggestions for future episodes or guests that we should include on the podcast, please email us at info@calpodcast.com. And in our upcoming episodes, look for more tips on how to lay the groundwork for an appeal when preparing for trial.
You have just listened to the California Appellate Podcast, a discussion of timely trial tips and the latest cases and news coming from the California Court of Appeal and the California Supreme Court. For more information about the cases discussed in today's episode, our hosts, and other episodes, visit the California Appellate Law Podcast website at calpodcast.com. That's calpodcast.com. Thanks to Jonathan Caro for our intro music. Thank you for listening, and please join us again.